So here I'm going to introduce the topics of genetic variation and natural selection. So species consist of a range of variants. So here's an image of a peppered moth, which clearly gets its name from its salt and pepper coloration on its wings. So in England, before the Industrial Revolution, peppered moths were well camouflaged by the lichen growing on the tree bark. But during the Industrial Revolution between 1760 and 1840, factories and coal plants started sending sooty pollution out into the air, and that killed the tree lichens, and it also blackened the bark on the trees. So when the tree bark darkened and the lichen died, these pepper-colored moths stood out against the new blackened background, making them an easy target for predators like birds. But luckily there was another but rarer variant of this moth that was all or mostly black. So these moths are the same species, they just have two color variants. That new black variant was now well camouflaged against the blackened trunks, and it survived better than the pepper-colored variant. So for example, the black peppered moth, the first one in Manchester, was recorded in 1848, and by 1895, less than 50 years later, 98% of the peppered moth population as a species were this black variant. So this shift occurred because natural selection depends on the differential success of these variants. That means they need differential ability to survive and reproduce. So before we move on, let's talk about some terminology. So in this picture, we can see 1, 2, 3, 4 different species. So a species is a group of individuals that can exchange genetic material through interbreeding or share alleles through reproduction. So if we look at the zebras here, we can say that all of these zebras from this region that interbreed are considered part of a population, because a population is an interbreeding group of organisms of the same species living in the same geographic area. So in other words, they share alleles and pass a combination of those alleles down to the next generation. So all the alleles in that population is a gene pool, which is all of the genetic material from all the individuals in the population. So it's the potential source of genetic material that could be passed down to the next generation through reproduction. So what causes genetic variation? There are two major things that cause genetic variation. The first thing is mutation. So mutations are changes in the genetic code. So in this example, we have a single copy of an allele, and as you know, this is the DNA, which is the genetic code. It's made up of 4 different nitrogenous bases: guanine, adenine, thymine, and cytosine, and those are abbreviated by the first letter in their name, so G, A, T, or C. So on the left, we see a change from a T here to a C here. But in the scenario on the right, there's no change happening. So if we follow the lineage on the left, we can see that in the next generation, another mutation occurs from a T into a G. So it's important to note that mutations can be somatic, which means it occurs in body tissues, or it can be in the germline, which means it occurs in the reproductive cells that are passed to the next generation. And only germline mutations can be passed to the next generation, of course. So mutations can also be harmful. We call it deleterious. They can be neutral, meaning that they are neither good nor bad, and that happens in non-coding regions of the genome, or advantageous, meaning that they improve chances of survival. So you should also note that there are various types of mutations beside these single point mutations that I'm showing here. The second way that genetic variation is generated is through recombination. So recombination shuffles the sections of DNA around to create new combinations of the mutations. So in this example, Let's assume that this is a locus of an individual. It has allele 3 on one of its pair of chromosomes and allele 1 on the other one of the pair. So during meiosis 1, the homologous chromosomes line up side by side, and through crossing over, they exchange sections of DNA. So in this simplified example, the TT from allele 1 is exchanged for the same section from allele 3, which has the G mutation. And in the end, we end up with yet another new variant called allele 4. So it's also important for you to understand the terminology associated with genotypes and phenotypes. So a genotype is the genetic makeup or combination of alleles of an individual. A phenotype is how the individual looks, and so their morphology, how they're shaped, what color they are. That's a phenotype. So both the genotype and the environment contribute towards an individual's phenotype. For example, genetics can contribute to the size of an individual, but it's also impacted by the environment. So if you had good nutrition and things like that. So individuals represent different combinations of alleles in the species gene pool. And population genetics is the study of genetic variation in populations.